Imagine the most powerful empire on Earth. Biggest navy. Huge army. Global influence. Now imagine 13 small colonies saying, "Yeah, we're good. We're leaving." And the empire responds, "You're what?" That's the American Revolution. How a group of farmers, merchants, and extremely dramatic pamphlet writers decided they'd had enough, and somehow defeated the British Empire. Let's simplify it. In the mid-1700s, Britain owned 13 colonies in North America. For years, things were mostly fine. The colonies traded. Britain protected them. Everyone made money. Then Britain fought a very expensive war, the French and Indian War. And guess what? It happens when governments spend too much money. They look for someone else to pay. Enter the colonies. Britain decided, "Hey colonies, since we protected you, you should help pay the bill." So they passed taxes. Stamp Act, Sugar Act, Townshend Acts. And here's the key issue. The colonists had no representatives in British Parliament. So they came up with the slogan, "No taxation without representation." Translation: you can't charge us if we don't get a vote. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. In 1773, Britain passed the Tea Act. Now here's the twist. The Tea Act actually made tea cheaper in the colonies. So technically, Britain was offering a discount. And the colonists responded with, "It's not about the price." The real issue wasn't the tea. It was the principle. Britain gave the East India Company a monopoly on selling tea in the colonies. That meant colonists couldn't buy from other suppliers. Local merchants got squeezed out. And Parliament was still taxing them, without giving them representation. To Britain, this was simple economics. To the colonists, this was control. And control was the problem. Hot beverage, December 16th, 1773. Things escalate. A group called the Sons of Liberty decided they'd had enough. So what did they do? They held a meeting in Boston. It got heated. And then someone basically said, "All right, let's go solve this." That solution? They disguised themselves loosely as Native Americans. Now, historians agree this was more symbolic than convincing. They weren't exactly undercover professionals. They boarded 3 British ships: Dartmouth, Eleanor, Beaver, and over the course of 3 hours, they dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. Not stole it, not damaged the ships. Just tea. Crate after crate after crate. It was disciplined destruction. Almost polite rebellion. Imagine watching from the shore as thousands of pounds of tea hit the water. Boston Harbor briefly became the world's largest cup of tea. The tea was worth roughly £10,000 at the time. That's millions in today's money. This wasn't a small symbolic act. It was economic sabotage. And they did it calmly. No random chaos. No property damage beyond the tea. They even reportedly swept the decks afterward. If you're going to start a revolution, apparently you clean up after yourself. Britain did not find this amusing. King George III was not sitting in London thinking, "Well, that's inconvenient." Instead, Parliament responded with the coercive acts, which the colonists called the Intolerable Acts. Boston Harbor was shut down. Massachusetts self-government was limited. British officials were given more protection. Troops were stationed in greater numbers. Britain's message was clear. You destroy our tea, we shut down your economy. Instead of isolating Boston, it unified the colonies. Nothing builds teamwork like collective punishment. The Boston Tea Party wasn't just about tea. It was a turning point. Before this, tensions were serious. After this, they were explosive. Because now, Britain wanted to make an example of Massachusetts. The colonies saw that resistance came with consequences. And compromise was slipping away. The tea hit the water. But the real thing that sank? Trust. And once that was gone, war wasn't far behind. In April 1775, British troops marched to seize colonial weapons in Lexington and Concord. Local militia confronted them. A shot was fired. No one knows who fired first. But that shot became known as the shot heard round the world. And just like that, a protest became a war. By 1776, something had shifted. At first, the colonists wanted representation. They wanted fair taxation. They wanted rights as British subjects. Now, they wanted out. This wasn't a disagreement anymore. It was a breakup. And not the quiet, let's stay friends kind. We're writing a formal document about why this isn't working kind. The Continental Congress needed a statement. Not a complaint letter. A declaration. They chose Thomas Jefferson, 33 years old, quiet, thoughtful, and very good with words. Jefferson sat down and drafted what would become one of the most famous political documents in history, the Declaration of Independence. And he did not hold back. What it actually said. At its core, the Declaration made three explosive claims. 1. All men are created equal. Radical idea in 1776. Kings were not fans of this sentence. 2. Governments get their power from the consent of the governed. Translation: you rule because we allow it. 3. If a government becomes destructive of people's rights, the people have the right to change or abolish it. In other words, if you're not protecting our rights, we can replace you. That is not a mild suggestion. That is a direct challenge to monarchy itself. Remember who they were talking to. Britain wasn't just any country. It was the world's strongest navy, a global empire, militarily dominant, economically powerful. And the colonies? They didn't even have a fully functioning army yet. So this document wasn't just philosophical. It was dangerous. Signing it meant committing treason under British law. Punishment? Death. Not exile. Not a fine. Death. And they knew it. On July 4, 1776, the Declaration was adopted. The delegates signed it. John Hancock famously wrote his name large and bold. Legend says he wanted King George to read it without glasses. Whether that's true or not, it makes for excellent historical drama. But here's the real point. Every man who signed it put his life, property, and reputation at risk. These weren't reckless teenagers. They were merchants, lawyers, landowners. They had things to lose. And they signed anyway. That's not just confidence. That's calculated courage. Before July 4th, this was a rebellion. After July 4th, it was a revolution. The colonies weren't fighting for better treatment anymore. They were fighting for a new nation. That shift changed everything. There was no going back now. No compromise. No partial agreement. The bridge had been burned. Metaphorically, the tea had already been thrown in the harbour. Now the Declaration had been signed. History was moving forward. Now here's the reality. Britain had a professional, battle-hardened army. The most powerful navy on Earth. Global trade networks. More money. More supplies. More experience. They were, quite literally, the superpower of the 18th century. The colonies had farmers, shopkeepers, blacksmiths, volunteers, extremely strong opinions, and George Washington, which, as it turns out, mattered a lot. Before he became founding father, Washington was a Virginia planter and landowner. He was tall, about 6 feet 2 inches, which in the 1700s made him basically a giant. He had already fought in the French and Indian War years earlier. And here's the interesting part. He had once fought for the British. Yes, the future leader of the American Revolution had previously worn a British uniform. History loves irony. During that earlier war, Washington learned two critical things. How the British Army operated. That the British Army was not invincible. He had seen their strengths. He had also seen their mistakes. So when the Continental Congress needed someone to lead a brand new army in 1775, they chose Washington. Not because he was perfect, but because he had experience, presence, and importantly, he was from Virginia. That helped unite northern and southern colonies. Politics mattered even then. The army he inherited. When Washington took command of the Continental Army, what he received was not exactly impressive. No formal uniforms, minimal training, almost no central supply system, short enlistments, low pay, low discipline. Some soldiers didn't even have proper shoes. This was less organized military machine, and more very motivated group project. Meanwhile, Britain had professional officers, structured command, logistics, warships. The comparison was uneven. Let's be honest. Washington lost battles. He lost New York. He was forced to retreat repeatedly. His army nearly collapsed more than once. At one point in 1776, things looked so bad that the revolution could have ended right there. But here's what made Washington different. He didn't panic. He retreated when necessary, preserved his troops, avoided total destruction, because he understood something most leaders in that era didn't. This wasn't about winning glory. It was about survival. Washington realized he did not need to defeat Britain in every confrontation. He just needed to keep the army alive, avoid catastrophic defeat, stretch the war long enough, make it expensive and exhausting for Britain. Britain was fighting a rebellion across an ocean. Every supply shipment had to cross the Atlantic. Every reinforcement took months. If the war dragged on long enough, British support at home would weaken. Washington wasn't playing for quick victory. He was playing for endurance. And endurance wins long wars. After a series of losses in 1776, morale was collapsing. So Washington did something bold. On Christmas night, 1776, he crossed the icy Delaware River. In a surprise attack, his forces defeated Hessian troops in Trenton. It wasn't the biggest battle of the war. But psychologically, it was huge. It proved the Continental Army could win. Momentum shifted. Sometimes a revolution doesn't need a massive victory. It just needs hope. Washington understood the revolution wasn't just military. It was political. If his army survived, France might join. Britain might reconsider. The colonies might stay united. If his army was destroyed, the revolution was over. So yes, he lost battles. Yes, his soldiers suffered. Yes, supplies were terrible. But he kept the army intact. And that meant the revolution stayed alive. Winter of 1777 to 1778. Valley Forge. Cold. Hungry. Low morale. But this is where the Continental Army transformed. Training improved. Discipline improved. Leadership strengthened. Sometimes the worst moments shape the strongest resolve. After the American victory at Saratoga, France saw an opportunity. France did not love Britain. So France joined the war on the American side. This changed everything. Suddenly Britain wasn't fighting a rebellion. They were fighting the colonies. France. Spain later. Across multiple continents. That's complicated. In 1781, British General Cornwallis moved his troops to Yorktown, Virginia. Washington saw his chance. American and French forces surrounded Yorktown. French ships blocked escape by sea. Cornwallis was trapped. He surrendered. Game over. Well, mostly. The war officially ended in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. Britain recognized American independence. Let's simplify the whole thing. Britain taxed the colonies. Colonies said, no thanks. Protests escalated. War broke out. France joined. Britain overextended. Colonies won independence. But the real reason they won? Persistence. Strategy. Foreign support. And British overconfidence. The American Revolution wasn't just about tea. It was about representation, power, self-governance, political philosophy. It inspired revolutions across the world. It also created a new nation, one that would eventually become a global power itself. Irony of history? The underdog became the superpower. If this made the American Revolution finally make sense. Subscribe to History Simplified. Because history isn't just about memorizing dates. It's about understanding how power shifts, how empires stretch too far, and how ordinary people sometimes change the world.